Dan Kardanek, I'm the Executive Director here at the Scranton JCC. On behalf of our staff, Board of Directors, we welcome you to this evening's program. It is my privilege to co-host this year's program, this year's Yom HaShoah ceremony with Rabbi Miriam Spitzer of Temple Israel of Scranton. We'd also like to thank our partners, the Jewish Federation of Northeastern Pennsylvania, our JCC Program Director, Vince Kalinowski, our Board President, Jennifer Novak, the Jewish War Veterans Post, our annual event chair, Esther Edelman, along with the dedicated members of our Yom HaShoah committee. Thank you for joining us this evening, both in person and online through our live stream. Scranton has a long tradition of commemorating Yom HaShoah. Today we remember 6 million Jews who perished. Today we mourn their memories and we pay tribute to those who liberated. We recall the unimaginable crime that was committed against the Jews of Europe. We are rightfully overcome with shock and sadness, but we also know that lessons must not be lost on us today. Never again can we believe that standing up against anti-Semitism and other forms of hate is someone else's responsibility. Unto every person there is a name, whether a mother, father, son or daughter, a sister or brother, a child, a friend. Each had hopes and dreams, and like all people, each come to life. We, the living, bear witness today, not just here, but in communities around the world. Together we affirm that the innocent lives lost in the Holocaust have not and will not be forgotten. They will always be remembered. Nobel Prize laureate Elie Wiesel wrote, "For memory is a blessing. It creates bonds rather than destroys them. Bonds between present and past, between individuals and groups. It is because I remember our common beginning that I move closer to my fellow human beings. It is because I refuse to forget that their future is as important as my own. What would the future be if it were devoid of memory?" At this time, I would like to welcome to the podium Rabbi Miriam Spitzer of Temple Israel of Scranton.
Welcome tonight for Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah, a date that was not easily chosen, a date that we might call a sacred compromise, a date that didn't make anybody totally happy, but a date that we can all agree on and come together as a large Jewish community, as a extended community with others joining with us as well. So welcome to everybody, because this is so important that we are all here to remember and to affirm that we, as Dan said, we do not leave the fight against evil to others, that we stand up. Especially today when we see anti-Semitism on the rise in all different areas, and when we look at the kinds of things that are happening in the world and the extent of power going on in Europe right now, we have to say, we are here, we stand up, we remember, we know what it means. I invite now Joe Albert of the Jewish War Veterans for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. On behalf of the Jewish War Veterans and the thousands of veterans of the Allied forces who ended the war and liberated Europe, and especially the 27 members of the local community who made the ultimate sacrifice, thank you for coming. And now, pledge allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Be seated.
We remember our 6 million who died when madness ruled and evil darkened the earth. We remember those of whom we know and those whose very names are lost. We cherish the memory of those who died as martyrs, those who died resisting, and those who died in terror. We cherish the memory of those of all that perished. We mourn for all that died with them, their goodness and their wisdom, which could have done so much to enrich humanity. We mourn for the genius and the wit that died, the learning and the laughter that were lost. May such times never come again, and may the suffering of our people not be in vain. In our daily fight against cruelty and prejudice, tyranny and persecution, their memories give us strength. They are like candles that shine from the darkness of those years, and in their light we know what goodness is. At this time, I am privileged to call up family members of survivors to light a candle in memory of their loved ones. Sunny Sandhouse, in memory of her parents.
Janice Cutler, in honor of her mother, Judy Brodman.
David Fish, in memory of his parents.
Mindy Grusin, in memory of her grandfather.
Dossie Gans, in memory of the 1.5 million children that perished.
Neil Zussman, in memory of his father.
Rabbi Miriam Spitzer, in memory of the 6 million that perished. Joe Albert, to light in memory of those who served and gave the ultimate sacrifice.
I now invite Rabbi Daniel Schwartz and the youth of Temple Israel and Temple Chesed, representative youth, to come and to do a reading.
In English, the term memory can be thought of as something that is static, even passive. In Hebrew, not so much. Hebrew is an ancient enough language that abstract concepts we can still trace back to their physical antecedents. Zachor is related to an object that points. Memory impels us to a connection to the past that is vivid and alive, and propels us forward to a future enriched by and informed by the past, so that we can create a future where never again means something.
We have come here to remember those who cannot be forgotten.
We have come to speak of that which cannot be spoken, but must not be left unsaid.
We have come to remind not only others, but also ourselves of what was done and what was not done.
We have come to ask questions that cannot be answered, but can be left unasked.
We know how to remember the dead we have known. We know how to commemorate the death of one person.
But all of us are mourners. All of us recall not one, but 6 million ones. Not only those we have known, but those no one can know, the names that are forever lost.
We're privileged to have a very special guest here tonight. Her name is Mindy Grusin. She is a granddaughter of a survivor and is currently serving as the president of the Jewish Medical Students Association at the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. It is my pleasure to call her up this evening. She will read a few excerpts from her grandfather's memoirs.
It was my grandfather's wish that we continue to tell his story, so here I am. My grandfather viscerally understood what it was to lose your freedom and what it meant to have freedom restored. He spent his entire teenage years, ages 13 to 18, in concentration camps and was one of only 5% of Lithuanian Jews who survived genocide. He witnessed unspeakable horrors, and yet he spoke of them. Because even though it was painful, he wanted us to learn from the past to make a better future. I'll read some of his autobiography for you today. Edward Grusin was born in 1927 in Kaunas, Lithuania. He came from a poor but close-knit family consisting of his parents, grandparents, and 2 older brothers. In 1941, at only 13 years old, his life would change forever. He wrote, "In August 1941, the German High Commissioner of Lithuania issued an order that all the Jews of Kovno must move into a small section of town called Vilijampolė. The Germans forced some Jews to build a barbed wire fence and an entrance gate. Anyone trying to escape was shot on the spot. This was the start of the infamous Kovno ghetto. Life in the ghetto became worse daily. People were shot for no apparent reason. All men and women over the age of 14 were forced to perform slave labor. People died of illness, disease, and were continuously rounded up for death marches. After losing his brother Charles and his mother and his grandparents and his aunt and uncle and their 3 young children, my grandfather remarked, 'It seems so eerie. Everything had suddenly changed. A few minutes ago we were still a family, and suddenly they had torn us apart. The only thing my dear mother wanted out of life was to be a devoted wife to my father and loving mother to her children. The inhumane cruelty is indescribable. They did all those unspeakable atrocities without blinking an eye. To them it was a job to destroy the Jewish people.' From there, my grandfather, his father, and his remaining older brother Zachary were transported to Kaufering, a satellite concentration camp of Dachau. Of this he says, 'We were issued a blanket and a striped prisoner uniform and a number, which served as our identity. They took away our name, pride, and dignity. We became objectified as subhumans and felt totally disgraced. Life as we know it now did not exist in that place. On April 26, 1945, as the U.S. Army advanced, the Nazis assembled the population of the entire camp and forced them to undertake a death march. My father, this is his words, my father, myself, and other prisoners who were too weak to walk were left behind. The next morning we saw there were new guards on the watchtowers, which seemed odd to us. I started walking around and found some bread in the kitchen. During my incarceration, I had 2 wishes. 1, to be free, and 2, to have enough bread to eat. My wishes came true on that miraculous day. We heard some artillery and small arms fire. We knew then that our suffering was about to come to an end, thinking either the Nazis would kill us or we would be liberated by the advancing U.S. Army. As the shooting stopped, we saw American troops enter the camp. The joy of the prisoners was overwhelming. We knew then that our suffering was over. I'll never forget the white stars painted on their trucks and tanks. After months of recuperation, I attended school and learned to become an officer machine repairman. My father became sort of a big shot inspector. My father's transformation was unbelievable. Here was a man who several months ago was near death and now was a respected citizen. It's amazing how life can change when a person is given freedom, respect, and opportunity. Upon arriving to the United States in July 1949, with only $7 in my pocket and a heart full of hopes and dreams, I never envisioned the amount of opportunity that I would find and accomplish things that went far beyond what I've imagined. My grandpa Ed Grusin went on to serve in the U.S. Army, amazingly, alongside some of the same servicemen who liberated him. He attained the rank of corporal and became a weaponry instructor. He was extremely proud of this time in his life. In 1954, my grandpa met my grandma Sonia, and it was love at first sight. They had 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and so far, 1 great-grandchild. To me, Ed Grusin's story is one of redemption and the strength of a people. When we remember those we have lost, we must also remember the fortitude of those who carried on. In his autobiography, he said, "I wish that future generations would learn that such atrocities could occur again unless they learn from the past. However, I see that storm is brewing again." When my grandfather left this mortal coil a few months ago, he'd done all he could. The rest of the work is up to us. Thank you.
I call now Rabbi Alex Hecht of Congregation Beth Shalom to read Psalm 23.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsor, binos deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchos yenahaleini, nafshi yeshobev yancheni, v'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeitz hamoves lo iraro ki ata imadi shiftecho mishantecho hema yenachamuni taroch lefonai shulchan neged tzoreroi tishanta v'Hashem en roshi kosi revayo achto v'chesed yedefuni kol yemei chayoi v'shati b'veis Adonai le'orech yamim. A song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of darkness, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days.
It is incumbent upon us to realize that sometimes we as a Jewish community feel like we stand alone, but it's very important here in Scranton and throughout the world that we know that we don't stand alone, not entirely alone. We have allies, we have friends, we have people with us, and we too stand with them in their times of need. Earlier this year, there was a terrible event in Texas where a synagogue was attacked, and after, in the wake of that, members of the Scranton Ministerium came forward, sent me letters, and said, Remember, you're not alone. We are also horrified by what happened. We also stand with you. And recently, the ministerium was looking for ways to show support of the Jewish community in Scranton. And I shared with them this event and that this was happening. And we have a representative from the Scranton Ministerium, Sister John Michelle of Campus Ministry at Marywood, is here to give us a reading.
First They Came by Pastor Martin Niemauer. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
To introduce our featured speaker this evening, it's my pleasure to call upon the president of the JCC of Scranton, Jennifer Novak.
I'm pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Neil Zussman, an award-winning experimental video artist and the owner of Mixplex LLC, a production consultancy based in Ithaca, New York. Neil has experience in electronically mediated visuals and sound and has produced videos for the New York City Health and Hospital websites, for the Ithaca Area United Jewish Community, and the noted Holocaust counselor Eva Fogelman, among many others. Previously, Neil taught at the City College of New York, Bronx Community College, Secondary Act in New York Public Schools, the New York State Summer School for the Media Arts, Brooklyn College, Ithaca College, and SUNY Cortland. Neil is especially interested in keeping the Holocaust top of mind for both Jewish and non-Jewish people. He encourages programs designed to unite, discourages apathy around issues of tolerance, especially in regards to war, peace, immigration, anti-Semitism, and systemic racism. This evening, he will be presenting In the Shadows of the Play of History, A Dream About Me, where he takes us on his father's journey, which began prosperously in 1930s Radom, Poland, to his survival as a Nazi slave laborer, and then as an American refugee who never lost his sense of humor and irony and always voted. Please welcome Mr. Neil Zussman.
Thank you, Rabbi Spitzer and the Jewish Community Center of Scranton for inviting me to share my memories of my father and my appreciation of his humanity and his fatherhood. Leo Zussman, he was Leibish Zeisman before he came here. He was born in Radom, Poland in 1911. He survived internment and forced labor for 6 years from 1939 to 1945. He spent a day in Auschwitz in 1944 after the Skolna camp in Radom was closed. He was luckier than other Jews. He got shipped out to forced labor on Nazi munitions project for the Todt Corporation at KL Weihingen, a subcamp of Natzweiler Struthof in the Alsace. There was chaos in the winter of 1944 as the Germans were losing. Weihingen was liberated by the French army on April 7th, 1945. At the very end, he found himself in a pile of dead bodies. The camp had been riddled with typhus. Germans were cleaning up the murder that they did before fleeing, and the other inmates who weren't killed were death-marched towards Germany. I knew little about the facts of my father's enslavement until 2008, when the archive of the International Tracing Service of the Red Cross in Bad Arolsen, Germany, was open to the public for research, and my family obtained documents. The inmates' lives at Natzweiler from 1944 to 1945 were documented by Israeli professor Edith Gil, who wrote about Radom in her scholarly work, From Radom to Weihingen via Auschwitz, Testimonies and Memoirs of a Transport of Jewish Slave Laborers, of which Leo was part of. I wrote to Professor Gill, and she wrote back to me and gave me a list that my father was on that I had never seen before. I took that list and I sent it to Judy Cohn at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And then she passed the list to Stephen Vitto, who gave me more documents just this past March than I had ever discovered before. As the Soviet armies approached in 1944, the Nazis had closed the Radom ghetto. I had recorded my father in his living room in 1984, and there was an image that he told me that sums up the horror that I have and that he felt. It was about how the Nazis were killing babies by smashing their heads on the wall before separating them from their mothers. Some mothers, he said, and he made a gesture showing how a mother would hold their baby at their breast. In the moment before, they put 3 fingers down the baby's throat to suffocate them before the Nazis had a chance to smash their head on the wall. Their last sip of mother's milk before they were killed. Mothers were either enslaved, raped, shot, or sent to Auschwitz to work. I cannot think of anything sadder than imagining what these mothers had to do. And if I could cry on demand, these are the images I would use to bring tears to my eyes every time. The Zachor Foundation writes about these Jewish mothers. The Nazis publicly hanged a mother and her 5-year-old daughter. The mother's crime? Illegally buying an egg for her starving child. The child's crime was she ate the egg. As females, Jewish mothers carried the soul-scarring effects of repeated rapes, sexual torture, and medical mutilation. The Nazis turned the mothers in the camps into murderers, forcing them to kill their own children or be killed with them in the ovens. And I'm sorry to quote from Rudolf Hess, the Auschwitz commandant, but he wrote in his autobiography that time and time again he witnessed mothers with laughing or crying children who went to the gas chambers. He recalled a young woman who, as she stood at the gas chamber, said, "I deliberately avoided being chosen for labor because I wanted to take care of my children and go through this in full awareness of what was happening. I hope it won't take long." We've since learned more about what happened in Auschwitz. Holocaust studies are still evolving. Though the witnesses are fewer, there is still much to learn, even if you are not someone who has a parent or grandparent who shared some stories, and especially that silence, how they couldn't talk about it because it was so horrible. Leo's father's name was Nisan, and his mother Feige. Before the war, Leo was a shoemaker and had a wife and child in Radom, but there is no record of their existence, and none of the other survivors we have known was ever able to name them for us. One of his brothers was named Shmuel, the others Fischel and Meyer. There's a sister that I can't name, and another brother. His cousin Itzhak Zeisman had a son named Bernie, and I'm going to be working with him now on building out a family tree. How did we get here? At Auschwitz, he remembers Dr. Mengele asking the new arrivals if they needed medical attention in his most professional doctor-like voice, only to send those who stepped forward after being put on a train without any food or water for 5 days. Those who stepped forward were immediately sent to the gas chambers. Dr. Mengele knew all about public relations, and he worked hand in hand with Joseph Goebbels to spin a rosier tale that could be believed not only by these Jewish prisoners, but by the world at large. Edward L. Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, invented public relations and wrote a book in 1928 called Propaganda. Joseph Goebbels admired Bernays, even though he was a Jew. When he became the minister of propaganda for the Third Reich, he sought to exploit Bernays' ideas to the fullest extent possible. For example, creating the Führer cult around Adolf Hitler. When I was 12, at public school and junior high school in Brooklyn, where I grew up, I had a social studies teacher named Lynn Diamond who encouraged me to write about my father, what I could learn from him, and what I could learn from William Shirer and the other writers that I would read who wrote about the Third Reich. And I couldn't understand how such a terrible thing could happen to innocent people on such a huge scale. Lynn Diamond was an inspiration and has given my curiosity the tools it would need to keep trying to discover the way things really are. I asked my father why the Jews didn't fight back. No ammo, no food, no fuel, he replied. But more importantly, unlike college-educated professional Jews who fled in the 1930s, Leo was a plain worker, as he described himself, a shoemaker. Working long hours for extra rations, he shared with the less fortunate by making handcrafted boots for the Gestapo. He and the other Jewish workers and tradespeople had no time to read the news or what presented itself as news, and certainly didn't have the time to analyze the news. Leo and everyone in Radom had their news censored by these big lie propagandists, and like the rest of the world in wartime, didn't know about the existence of these death camps. It was hard to believe such inhuman death camps existed, and for many deniers today it still is. The inmates saw slogans, some from the train: "Work shall make you free," "Welcome to New Palestine." On February 2nd, 2020, in fact, that was the last time I was out in public in a group like this, in Ithaca, I organized an event to bring together 3 eminent scholars: author and psychologist Eva Fogelman, Nobel laureate Professor Roald Hoffman, and Professor Dan Schwartz of Cornell University. I organized this panel because I wanted to understand why some non-Jewish people would risk their lives to rescue the Jews. Eva Fogelman had written a book called Conscience and Courage about the rescuers in World War II. It was my hope that we could learn to appreciate our own attitudes towards other people who seek rescue, perhaps providing a roadmap for human understanding and well-being today. I invited Rabbi Miriam Spitzer to offer a prayer, and she told a story from Invisible Lines of Connection by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner called Strangers on the Bus, and then gave the audience a rabbi's prayer, which I will repeat here. Master of the universe, give us, Jew and Gentile alike, the strength to take a stand against anti-Semitism. Give each of us the courage to take a stand against all the other phobias that are rearing their ugly head. Grant us the fortitude, the strength, and the creativity to fight hatred in every form with conventional and unconventional means. May it not be said that we stood idly by and did nothing. Amen. The rescuers, or righteous Gentiles, as Yad Vashem calls them, are a source of fascination to Jews who often try to understand how they were compelled to act and how others can be taught to emulate them. The answers are elusive. What else could I have done? Rescuers commonly respond with a mixture of puzzlement and annoyance. Why are Holocaust survivors obsessed with future generations remembering? Why do they command us all to zachor, to remember? What is it they want us to remember, to communicate the Holocaust meaningfully, with an eye to the future as well as the past? Roald Hoffman gave the event this day, this Heroes and Martyrs Remembrance Day. In an email, he gave the event its title. He said, "I am not at peace with heroes because of the gendered English language in the one sense of the word, that heroism is for gods and not humans, ergo mythological. I would like to see the implication of being human somehow." And then he suggested, how about when it is hard to be human? Lessons from the rescuers in the Holocaust. Roald Hoffman, as a small child, was hidden under the floorboards by a Polish family. In January 1943, the Safrans arranged for their family to escape and go into hiding with Mikola Diuk and his wife Maria. Roald's father had been arrested, running guns for the ghetto, and was executed. They remained in hiding for 15 months, from January 1943 until June 1944. No one in the village knew about their existence. But it was not only the Jews who were in danger of death. The Diuk family, too, lived in great fear of the Germans, who were being denounced by their neighbors. After the war, still in Poland, Clara Safran remarried another Holocaust survivor, Naftali Margulies, who later changed his name to Hoffman. Roald adopted his stepfather's name, and in 1949, they emigrated to the USA. He became a renowned chemist, winning many awards, and in 1981 received the Nobel Prize. He is also a writer who has published 4 volumes of poetry. Eva Fogelman studied at CUNY, City University of New York, with Stanley Milgram, author of Obedience to Authority, an experimental view, written in 1974. One of the most famous psychological experiments, and showed how both his experiment and Nazi Germany successfully transformed large numbers of ordinary and arguably indifferent people into willing inflictors of harm. Christopher Browning also explored this phenomenon in his book, Ordinary Men. Eva asked Milgram a question that he couldn't answer. She wanted to know why a small minority of people in his study disobeyed authority and did not inflict harm in his experiment. How we tell the Yom HaShoah story is important to me, and it is being abused more and more in our public media and political discourse. It feels like the propaganda continues. I'm a librarian. In preparing for the panel, I reread Eva's book and many articles she had written about survivors. She had met hundreds of survivors, writing this work in the 1980s, when they were all later in life, getting on. As you know, many of those survivors are now not with us. In 1991 or earlier, Eva had served as a consultant for a 1992 film called Liberators, Fighting on Two Fronts in World War II, which focused on the topic of black soldiers discriminated against despite their heroic accomplishments. The film had been widely praised and nominated for an Academy Award. Bill Miles and Nina Rosenblum, the film's co-directors, were challenged about the accuracy of survivor Ben Bender's recollection of being liberated from Buchenwald. He was not sure which camp he had been in. It has since been proven that the all-black 361st Tank Battalion that fought valiantly against the Germans were the first to liberate Gunskirchen, a sub-camp of Mauthausen in Austria. But because of the inaccuracy of Mr. Bender's recollection, the Academy and PBS later pulled the film, and this important story has been hidden for many years. It's a great film. It's a little hard to get, but it's still out there. When I produced the event When It Is Hard to Be Human, I was hoping to get a contemporary look about altruism, but I found irony in preparing for the event. I had gone to Eva Fogelman's Wikipedia page to see what was easily available to read about who was Eva Fogelman. And in the first paragraph, there was a mention of the film being a complete fabrication. I wound up editing the Wikipedia article, and the edits still stand because it was like an act of information vandalism. I didn't put it in my talk, but there's a woman, she was written about in Wired magazine, who's edited hundreds of articles where people have vandalized the story of what happened to the Jews in World War II. And if you're a librarian, you always tell your students never use Wikipedia, but it's the 4th most used website in the world. So the Holocaust was spurred on and hidden from the world through propaganda, and we could see false messages gaining momentum in our time. The recent banning of Art Spiegelman's mouse by a school board in Tennessee troubled me as a son of a Holocaust survivor. PEN America, a nonprofit organization that works to protect freedom of expression, said there are 155 bills in 38 states that would censor what teachers can say or teach in classrooms about the Holocaust. Republican-led state legislatures are passing new censorship laws to ostensibly protect children. In 2021, a South Lake, Texas school leader told teachers to balance Holocaust books with opposing views. Teachers in this Carroll School District say they fear being punished for stocking classrooms with books dealing with racism, slavery, and now the Holocaust. In such a diverse group as this, I would be best advised not to discuss politics at all in the interest of this memorial and out of respect for the memory of my father. But the normalization of political violence is all the more troubling to me personally as a son of a Holocaust survivor. Alexander, Congressman, all right, but I'm going to do it anyway. Forgive me. Paul Gosar was recently censured by Congress for producing a fundraising video of him killing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and attacking Joe Biden. He was then censured and stripped of his committee assignments, but afterwards His fellow Republicans encircled him, shaking his hand and patting him on the back. He said, "No matter how much the left tries to quiet me, I will continue to speak out." He did not apologize and instead insisted that the video was not intended as a threat. He accused Democrats of imposing a double standard that failed to hold members of their own caucus accountable for controversial rhetoric, but he offered no examples. He raises funds with white nationalist Nick Fuentes and his America First Political Action Committee. I watched Nick Fuentes in a video that he proudly posted, describing a numerical analysis of whether or not you really could bake 6 million cookies in 5 years. He is a known Holocaust denier, but it's not just politicians. Anyone involved in the running of our own electoral system now is threatened by this new discourse of normalized violence. Through public records and interviews, Reuters, an international news service, documented 102 threats of death or violence received by more than 40 election officials, workers, and their relatives in 8 of the most contested battleground states in the 2020 presidential contest. Each was explicit enough to put a reasonable person in fear of bodily harm or death, the typical legal threshold for prosecution. Almost all of the threats appeared to be inspired by the claims that the election was rigged against President Trump. The messages often included highly personal, sometimes sexualized threats of violence or death, not only to the officials themselves, but also to their family members and their children. There is still no convictions on any of those cases. The seams of solidarity, unity, and cooperation necessary during a worldwide pandemic are so different than the fascist totalitarianism of Hitler and the Nazis who turned my father's family into martyrs and heroes. Yet anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers claim they are fighting for our freedom while issuing violent threats to our elected officials, denying the outcome of the 2020 election with no evidence of this massive fraud, and now stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021, in what looks to me more and more like an attempted American coup. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. apologized for saying the unvaccinated have less freedom than Anne Frank. Making reckless comparisons to the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million Jews for a political agenda, to me is outrageous and deeply offensive. Those who carelessly invoke Anne Frank, the Star Badge, and the Nuremberg trials exploit history and the consequences of hate. My wife Miriam, who is with us today, continues to help me learn how to live more out of pure trust than out of the fear and anger and the thirst for revenge that I have felt so often, thinking about my father's experience, stepping into his shoes, looking for lost relatives, calling their descendants as if the war had just ended, and I found myself a Yiddishkeit in Yankee Land, as he was in New York. It was his generosity of spirit that has allowed me to explore this freedom-loving America and try to be a responsible citizen of the world, to try to leave it a better place for my children. World history may not have gotten some things right, and there have been too many other incidences of violence. In each of these instances, there are those who participate, there are those who are victims, and there are also rescuers. America may not have got some things right in our own past, and we've done things, but now we have the power to chart our course together, not by violent words and partisanship, but by consensus, which is so hard in this polarized society where our ease of getting informed drives us further apart. Leo was an American patriot who loved his country and always voted. Our best days are ahead of us. We know we can and will do better. Democracy is fragile and messy, but we cannot shut ourselves in and hide. It is time we as Jews and non-Jews around the world recognize what has gone wrong, as well as acknowledging our shared human needs and dreams. That which has been broken shall be repaired. In my Father's honor, for the guidance and freedoms he allowed me. Amen.
Thank you for sharing the stories of your father and of the other survivors that you spoke about. And thank you for teaching us lessons to go forward, sometimes lessons that are hard to hear. We rise now for the El Malei Rachamim prayer.
שוכב במרמים, המצא מנוחה נכורה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים ודהורים כזוהר גרקיה מסגירים את כל הנשמות של 6 מיליוני היהודים, חללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו ושנגזפו על קידוש השם בידי המרצחים הגרמנים ועוזריהם משובע העמים, בעבור שכל הקהל מתפלל לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכם והן בעל הרחמים יסירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויזרור לחיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני ונחלתם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימין, ונאמר Amen.
The mourners Kaddish together, Yiskadal, Yiskada, Shemei Rabbo, Bielmadira, Kirusei, Viamlich Malchusei, V'chaye chon u'vyomei chon u'v'chaye d'chol beish Yisrael ba'agalo u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbo mevorach v'yolam u'omei olmayo yisparach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yisramam nasei v'yisadar v'yisaleh v'yisalo shmei d'kudisha b'richum li'elo min kol b'rchosa v'shirasa tush b'chosa v'nechamasa Dam Yiram Yomavim Ruamein. Shalom Rabba Mishemaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'akol Yisrael V'im Ruamein. Oseh Shalom B'imromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, V'akol Yisrael V'im Ruamein.
Let's remain standing as join me with the Atikwa. Kolot baleva benima nefesh Yehudi homiya olfatei
2020 Pew Survey and Claims Conference survey revealed some disturbing findings. It revealed Americans' limited knowledge of the Holocaust, raising concerns about Holocaust ignorance and also about Holocaust denial. Two concerning facts that these surveys cited: fewer than half of American adults know how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And 1 in 10 Americans under 40 have never even heard of the Holocaust, the largest anti-Semitic act in history. Today's event was generously sponsored by a grant from the JCC, Association of North America's Israel Engagement Fund, with the purpose of helping to spread awareness and education. In order to help spread awareness and to educate the knowledge of everything related to the Holocaust, we invite all of you to briefly join us to paint a rock in memory of the victims over here at the side of our room. We encourage you then to take your rock, place it around the community, whether it be your home, a local park, a trail, or a landscape. Or if you'd like, you can leave it here after you paint it, and our JCC staff will be happy to do it for you. We want you to honor and remember our victims by placing a rock for others to see and share. We have names of victims and their biographies on the table on the side here. Select a name, learn about the victim, write their names on the rock, paint a peaceful picture, paint something about that particular victim. Take it with you, place it around the community, Naog Park while you're walking, in your own yard, in a landscape, display it in your office. Use it as an opportunity to educate, an opportunity to spread awareness. Please, we invite everybody to come over and paint a rock. Thank you for joining us this evening. Help us keep telling the stories. Thank you.